Okay. Hey, welcome back to another reading update book vlog thing from Mad Jerkle. That's me. Glad you're joining me once more, where I ramble on about the awards that I have perceived on paper and screens. That's what we do around here, around these parts. This February, my reading started with a specific theme, which there are three texts that fit very well together in terms of subject, and I'm gonna throw them together here as well in this video, in this first section of this video, of this vlog. It makes a lot of sense because I'm gonna put content notes, content warnings here, because this deals with some subjects that are definitely unsettling for some people. By and large, we're gonna be talking about the porn industry and cultural aspects relating to sex from a sociological point of view. So here are the content warnings for the subjects of these three books that I'm gonna be talking about here. So if you're not comfortable about hearing that stuff, I'm probably not gonna be going into much detail here, but as a general warning, there it is. Some orange flavored rock sugar for that fancy smoked black tea, probably my favorite tea. Alright, so the first ebook I don't have in my ebook reader because it's actually an Amazon ebook which is locked to Kindle devices. I don't have a Kindle device. Kindle? Amazon Kindle? I don't have a Kindle device, but I did download the Kindle app to read this. That was the only way I could read this for free. Aggression in Pornography, Myths and Realities by Eran, Shor and Kimberly Seida. I hope that I'm pronouncing that right. Which is the result of research studies from, like, I think those are sociology students, and there's like a research paper or like a book resulting out of research papers. They tried to do an academic analysis of pornography with a focus on aggression and violence in popular pornography, attempting to put some empirical data and evidence to a subject that has been researched before, but rarely in an unbiased and empirical way. Because the conversation about pornography use is such a divisive one, most pornography scholars, that's a term they used as well, because pornography has been studied for decades, because it's obviously such a popular medium in our culture, has been for decades, and it's only becoming more popular and more accepted. So the whole conversation about pornography, whether it's bad or good, is often led by people that are very biased to one side or the other. And this research paper, these people tried to add some data and some empirical research to this conversation that isn't biased, that looks at it through an academic lens as best as they could. And that's an interesting premise. And what they did is that they analyzed a whole bunch of popular pornography videos, where they went to Pornhub. They picked out 409 videos from the popular section and a bunch from just the random video shuffle section, and then analyzed them for violent content, for aggressive content, to get some data on how much of popular pornography actually portrays aggression. They came up with some categories on how to evaluate those. They had a whole bunch of volunteer people doing side-by-side analysis of these things to come to a more widespread conclusion on the data. That's the quantitative side of the research, and then the qualitative side is that they interviewed hundreds of, I think it was 102 pornography consumers, people that regularly consume pornography, both male, female, and at least a few non-binary people as well, because they were under the impression that this sort of research, this subject, does need, besides the actual data, also the actual reception from the consumers to further analyze what aggression means in pornography. And while the pool size for the data of 409 videos isn't huge, and it would have been a lot nicer if this research was done with a lot more of a pool of analysis, it is enough to still give some interesting points of view, some interesting observations, and throwing up some interesting questions about the whole subject. So they went to Pornhub, and it's interesting to note that they did this research before Pornhub revamped their entire moderation system, because up until a few years ago, it used to be that everybody could upload anything to Pornhub, which led to a lot of fringe shit being uploaded there, which has in recent years led to a lot of controversy and legal action, which nowadays you can only upload things if you're a verified person. So there's no more random amateur shit on Pornhub. So they did this research before this change happened. So when they did the research, the videos that they analyzed could have still been the most whack-ass shit. So if there was a more... it was unfiltered. It wasn't filtered. Aside from the popularity aspect of the popular video section that they analyzed, there was no filter in terms of content. So if there was a bias in viewership towards aggression and pornography, it would have shown up here. It would have been there more than it would have been if they did the research now, after the moderation changes. But it's just interesting to note, I feel like, because it would have changed the result of the research, definitely, if they did this like a few years later. They were there at the right time, I guess. And the research, the data shows a lot of interesting stuff that they couldn't, for example, they couldn't find any evidence that pornography has actually become harder or more aggressive over time. They analyzed different videos uploaded over a stretch of years, and they couldn't find any evidence for like more recent videos being more violent than like older videos. So that myth wasn't supported by their findings. There was also what I find really interesting, but it kind of makes sense. A lot of older research really only focused on heterosexual pornography. They made an actual effort to also include homosexual pornography, and that led to really interesting insight that by the bare numbers, homosexual pornography, especially male-on-male pornography, statistically showed more often aggression than heterosexual pornography, which is probably because in male-female pornography there's already a sort of established hierarchy between a dominant and a submissive person, so which isn't inherently there when you have like two same-sex people. And so I guess there is the pressure to establish that more, who is the dominant and the submissive one, by more aggressive behavior. Makes sense. So it's not really that surprising, but not something that I've thought about before. And it's interesting that like their statistics, their data supports that. They also made an effort to analyze different ethnic groups to see if there's any difference, and there was. Which, among other things, Asian women are more prone to be the submissive one in pornography, which I'm saying now because it leads into a book that I'm talking about later. That's all based on the actual empirical findings of analyzing these videos. And then there's the other side that was used as a reflection of that, with the reception of the actual consumer to this media through interviews of these over 100 people, which helps to shine more light on some of these findings. For example, based on their pool of interviewees, statistically, female viewers enjoy and seek out aggressive pornography a lot more than male viewers. Obviously, 100 people isn't enough to generalize that on a bigger scale, but it is an interesting point of view, I guess, interesting finding. There's also a huge emphasis by the interviewees that they are very aware of pornography being fantasy and not representing real life sexuality. The myth of probably the outdated thought of people not being able to distinguish between pornography and their own sex life. Based on the interviews, it doesn't seem that people are actually influenced in their sex life based on the pornography they watch. There's also a very heavy notion of consumers valuing consent over aggression. Even in BDSM pornography, where aggression is a conscious, vital part of the porn, there is still, from consumer standpoint, a big focus on consent. That is still something they value, which also says a lot against the thesis of pornography corrupting people, you know what I mean? Also, they didn't find that the popular pornography on Pornhub showed any more aggression than the completely randomly chosen videos. So there is, again, not really any data to support the notion that aggression in pornography is popular, more popular than non-aggressive porn or whatever. Again, this isn't the most thorough, wide-scale research, but it is still big enough to give a lot of interesting insight into pornography trends, myths about pornography consumption, and the consumer themselves, and with their impressions of the media. This was a really, really interesting research paper. I would love this to be done with a bigger pool of information. This seemed very, very solid and a good read as well. This is a very academically structured book, but it's still a very good read, at least if you're interested in the subject. And I found it very interesting. I enjoyed this a lot. So then, while I was in the subject matter anyway, I wanted to even it out. This was an attempted unbiased academic study of pornography. Cool, dope, alright, whatever. I wanted to even it out a bit and decided to read a book by a person who was actively involved in the industry and doesn't have a positive opinion about it, for good reason. The autobiography by Traci Lords, Underneath It All. And I didn't know who Traci Lords was beforehand. Maybe you do, maybe not. This is where the subject becomes more fringe and the content warnings become more apparent. Traci Lords is still alive and she's well and good. But as a teenager, she was surrounded by a lot of bad influences and ended up in the pornography industry when she was way too young. Like, actually too young in the eye of the law. In the 80s, she was a popular porn star before she was even of age because of a faked ID. Abuse led her into toxic decisions, which became self-destructive and culminated in her being in the pornography industry way too early. Very shortly after she actually did turn 18, she left the pornography industry, but then had to struggle with being basically the poster child survivor of a heinous crime, the weird cultural backlash towards her from different sides, and then her maturing, her growing into a successful adult, finding her footing in the acting business in Hollywood, finding actual human connection after years of abusive relationships. I really appreciate that she ended up writing this book. I really appreciate that she shares her point of view, her experience like that, with like full-on sincerity and confidence. It is such a weird and difficult circumstance of growing up like that, which is, I'm glad she's thriving these days. She's well and good. She found her way out of that whole swamp of abuse. She's active still. She's on social media. She is still doing her shit. She apparently lives a good life, which, thank God, because that makes reading this this book, especially the parts about her horrible teenage years, a lot better, like a lot easier to stomach. I'm very, very glad she's good and happy today. But yeah, I mean, it is a wild, fascinating story to hear about her coping mechanisms, her aftermath, her how to dig yourself out of that, and I appreciate this book. It wasn't the best autobiography I've read. I've read a bunch of autobiographies, especially by like people in the media, in the entertainment business. And this wasn't the best written or structured one, but it did its job. It was fine. She is a very charming person, and again, her story is fascinating and totally worth being told. Like, no doubt about that. Her time in the porn industry was the catalyst of her, like, of her position in the public eye, which for a while did like taint every move she made in her life. But obviously the book goes beyond that with her life after that. So this isn't completely about the pornography industry, but it is still, if one is interested in the pornography industry, I do believe that Traci Lords' story is one of the most valuable ones to learn about, because it is such a prominent example of one of the worst elements of the pornography industry. And yeah, Traci Lords is awesome. She's cool. And again, while it wasn't the best written autobiography I've read, it was still a very interesting one. So that was the second book that I read about this whole, like, in this whole subject of pornography. Followed that up with a third non-fiction book. This is a book that I was looking at for a while now and was really, really interested to reading, so I'm glad I did now. The first book, Aggression in Pornography, was a academic research paper. The second book, Traci Lords' autobiography, was a personal account of own experiences. And this third book here now is like a mix of both. It has elements of both. We're talking about Giboom Park, not your yellow fantasy. Deconstructing the legacy of Asian fetishization. That is a subject that I've been interested in for years, because I've noticed it myself that probably a lot of you maybe have noticed it, that Asian aesthetics and perceived values have been popular to a point of objectification or fetishization in Western culture a lot, especially from my experiences with like a misogynistic tone to it. And I was always kind of wondering why. And this book really like shed more light on that subject, made me understand more why the fuck the alt-right incel loves hentai so much. And this book is, again, more of a mix of a personal life experience and academic research, because Giboom Park presents this as her research into a subject matter that she personally... I mean, as an Asian American of Korean descent, she is affected by this apparent fetishization of Asian aesthetics and people. She's affected by that herself. So obviously she has experience with that, and so she began to research it on her own account and wrote this book as a result of it. And it is very interesting. It shows how deep the roots of this problem are. In Western cultures, like, this is focusing mostly primarily on the USA and like the tension between the dominating white population and the Asian American people, but it's still what the things that are talked about here still ring true to pretty much any white dominated Western country perceiving Asian people or media. It still rings true to other places in the world. It is a very popular thing to do, apparently, especially in misogynistic communities, to fetishize Asian people and like making them and objectifying them on their ethnic traits, because Asian people have this standing as being like submissive by nature in Western culture. Prejudice meeting power play fantasies in a sexual setting. And this book is doing a large spread of things, looking at the historical roots of that, looking at media, looking at different communities, interviewing a lot of people. There's a lot of ground that's covered here. It's very thorough. It's definitely the result of very thorough research. And even it also goes beyond just the like sexualization, the fetishization of ethnic people. It even goes to other subjects like not only are Asian women fetishized, but it's also very widespread to have this prejudice against Asian men being weak and non-threatening. Another very popular racist point of view, feeding into the whole, into the same problem. And besides the academic approach of the research, also the like personal experience of the author leading into it as well, making this a pretty like full package, you know. It is a fascinating subject. It's such a weird, complicated cultural phenomenon, this widespread fetishization of a whole ethnic group, but it's very real. And it since it is real, it definitely deserves, or rather needs, to be looked at, which this book does pretty well. My only like kind of gripe with this book, but this is just personal taste, bit of a pet peeve. the structure of the book. It loves to like emphasize quotes and paragraphs in the middle of the text and shit, which just reminds me of like an internet article, an online article really trying to get my attention. It's just a pet peeve of mine. I'm not a fan of that. But again, that's just personal taste. It's not something that I actively hold against this book. On the other hand, there are also like little art pieces to break up the text by assume all of them Asian American artists, which is actually pretty nice. I do respect that this book is actively trying to make this book even visually appealing, so I cannot really fault it for that. It is a very good book. A very good book. I recommend it wholeheartedly if you are interested in this sort of subject. It even goes into very recent parts of society. Like, it even talks about incel culture, primarily online, which is clearly a very prominent factor for this phenomenon. It also talks about like the whole like mail order bride industry and shit like that. All these touching grounds in society are populated by Western people, which keep this objectification of Asian people alive. All these different facets. So yeah, good book, and definitely something I recommend. And that's these 3 books, I read them back to back in this first part of February. It just felt fitting to combine them while I'm reading one of them anyway. It felt fitting to follow them up with another one of these, and it gave me a good spread of like different points of view and like subject matters regarding like human sexuality in terms of like societal aspects, and also like the porn industry, which is an interesting subject in itself in my opinion. That's 3 fascinating subjects by a lot of interesting people that I'm glad I read. And that's the end of the filthy section of my reading vlog this month. You made it. If you clicked on the if you went to the timestamp before I started this and now you're here, welcome back. That seems more appropriate. I talked about those 3 previous non-fiction books about like, you know, pornography and sexuality and that sort of things. Maybe you skipped that part with the timestamp that I gave you. Now you're here, and I got some bad news for you. There are more trigger warnings coming with this fiction book that I'm gonna be talking about now. When I talked about the previous 3 books, I didn't realize or know that this would be the next book that I'm gonna be talking about this month. I'm purposefully sitting here in the dark, only lit by the shine of my computer screen and the colorful LED lights that are so popular these days, because the book that I'm gonna be talking about now is written by a YouTuber called May Leitz, who I have mentioned her before in a video, because I've been watching her for a couple of years now, and she wrote this book. This is her debut novel, and this is more like her kind of style in content creation when it comes to color and lighting, so I felt like this is a bit more appropriate when I'm talking about her book here. But this book is an extreme horror novel, and it comes with its own set of trigger warnings, but they are on the cover art. May Leitz herself values the use of trigger warnings when it comes to content creations, because she frequently dabbles in fringe subjects with her own content. So she went ahead and put content notes right on the cover art of the book, which is very, I guess, innovative. Makes sense. This is very blurry now, but I'm gonna the graphic is here, so you can actually fucking see it, read it. As you can see on this cover art, these are the trigger warnings that the author May Leitz chose to put forward to notify potential readers. There you go. But I think you will be able to listen to this even if these subjects bother you, because I'm not gonna be going into the actual contents of the book. Don't worry about it. I'm not gonna throw anything in your face that's gonna be in any way explicit. Again, May Leitz, the content creator, has a long track record of talking about specifically fringe pieces of media, which range from weird, low-budget horror movies to actual, deep dives into problematic media. Like May Leitz talked about true crime and gore media and all of that stuff before. So naturally it makes sense that subjects like these were also going into this novel here. And this novel is a so-called extreme horror novel. It is very nasty. It is called Fluids because there is probably every bodily fluid in here that you could imagine. It is undoubtedly one of the nastiest books I've read in my life, but it's not like pulp trash. If you can deal with extreme horror, there's a bit more to be gained from reading this book. The setup of this novel is that a cis woman and a trans woman meet online on a dating app, and they decide to meet up, and what starts as like a possibly genuinely romantic partnership between two very troubled souls eventually develops into one of them being incredibly toxic and destructive. That is the whole setup of the book. You don't need to know anything more. That and the trigger warning should be all you need to decide whether you want to read it or not. It was engaging, I will say that for sure. It was genuinely engaging. I genuinely was looking forward to, or was interested in what would happen next pretty much any time. It immediately introduces this very specific vibe of grime. I feel like that's a very good word to describe this whole book. And this sort of grime, this sort of vibe only like fluctuates into different extremes throughout the story. There's a lot of rough stuff in there. A lot of the book I read like on my daily commute on the train, and I'm prone to like travel sickness a little bit. So many times that I was reading this book on the train, I had this like light nausea from the traveling, and this light nausea mixed with these absolutely foul, at points absolutely foul, visceral horrors in this book were quite the mix, I must say. It is definitely 100% not a book for everybody, because it is very over the top in its visceral disgustingness, but it does have a few interesting ideas and metaphors about like the consequences of trauma, that sort of thing, of people that are lost in their own identity. A very big subject of the book is the threshold between love and pain, or love and violence, and people that cannot really discern one from the other, that sort of thing. It's an incredibly grimy book. I enjoyed it quite a lot. It was very enthralling. It had me pretty glued to the page. And it's not very long either. So the extreme horror didn't really overstay its welcome. Also, it is a little bit stilted in some of its prose, in how it's written. Like, it is a debut novel after all, but it is, for a debut novel, it is very good and very interesting and pretty creative. I enjoyed this, and coincidentally, just a week or two ago, May Leitz announced her second book being published later this year. It will be called Girl Flash. It will be even more personal to her. Like the first book, Fluids, it is a completely fictional story. It is so over the top, obviously it's fictional. But there's very obviously also specs in the characters of Fluids that come from real life experiences of May Leitz herself. But with the next book, Girl Flash, apparently that one's gonna be even more personal in a genuine way. And I'm really curious where her writing is gonna go from Fluids onwards. And that, since we're at the end of February, is basically all the books that I've read this month. 3 non-fiction books, 1 fictional novel, all of them relating to sexuality in a way, which kind of like puts this all in a neat bundle. I mean, I read the first 3 books, the non-fiction books, on purpose, one after the other, because I did want to explore this specific subject from different perspectives. The fact that the fiction book afterwards was also like kind of in the realm of sexuality and violence was just coincidence. Then I have one more text that I've read. It isn't a published book. This is a short story that was published through the New York Times, if I'm not mistaken. And it is on Goodreads and Storygraph. It is on there, so I just logged it there as well after reading. Why not? It is, I guess technically it is a published text. It's just not in a book, and it is a short story and not a full novel or something. And since I read this, I'm just gonna include it here real quick. Breatharians by Callan Wink. It's a short story that regards a little boy living on a farm with his parents, who gets tasked by his father to go out and kill all the stray cats that are a nuisance on the farm. And while that happens, we get to learn about his parents, his mom and dad, who are living in 2 separate buildings on the farm because they aren't really a pair anymore. This deals a lot with relationships between people, but also a bit relationships between humans and animals, which is different regarding on your circumstances or where you live. Also, there's a lot of metaphors about sustenance and how you consume things, because the title Breatharian, that's the word for somebody who only eats through breathing. Like they take their sustenance through the air, which is what his mom in the story does. There's a lot of metaphors with cooking, with this breatharian thing, with these people raising the animals that they eat because they are farmers. It's a short story. There's a bunch of interesting ideas. I do have to say though that the writing is a bit over the top at points. It's a bit too much, because it sometimes it really feels like the author is just trying to show off with all the fancy words they know, which is a taste thing. Obviously other people don't mind it that much or enjoy it even. I had a little bit of a problem with that, but overall I did enjoy this short story, although I wish it was more than a short story, because I do see a lot of potential in the setup of the characters and this plot. But it is obviously, since it is so short, not really explored that heavily. But that is really cool, because the author did at some point write and release a full novel called August, which is apparently based on the short story where the boy was also called August. And I'm curious to read that at some point. Who knows when though. But yeah, that is actually all. That is my entire February. That was the 4 books and 1 short story that I read this month.
pretty good reading. The books that I'm reading now are a lot more sterile.
The next books are gonna be more sterile. I do have 2 books again from the library. 2 physical books from the library, which I'm aiming to read next. Though, like, the thing with the ebooks is that I can read them on the go, even when I don't have my ebook reader with me, because I got the app on my phone that syncs with the ebook reader. So when I'm sitting at a bus stop or in the train or whatever, I can just whip out my phone and read a few pages. One of the reasons why I'm getting through these books so quickly right now, I'm not carrying these physical books with me everywhere I go, so these are gonna be dedicated home reads and are gonna be slower for that matter. But these are my current interlibrary loans. This one is in German. I started this already. Fusionen, Kartelle, Skandale by Kurzlechner. This is probably the most dry book I'm gonna be reading. Fusionen, Kartelle, Skandale. Das Bundeskartellamt als Wettbewerbshüter und Verbraucheranwalt bei Werner Kurzlechner. Ain't that sounding German to you? Dang, bruh. This is a business history book? Is that what you call it? Business history? So I'm going to business school right now, right? We've been talking about Germany's cartel office. Apparently that's what it's called. Germany's National Competition Regulatory Agency. Basically the arm of the law trying to make sure that the free market stays free and fair by prohibiting harmful cooperating of different companies. Right, that's what that is. And I just thought that it sounded interesting to me to read about this book is about the history of German's cartel office. Stinky companies tried to do some shady shit and how like the state like acted against it. I just felt like I wanted to learn a bit about that. And then the other book, continuing a little bit my Afghanistan reads. This one is called Buzkashi, Game and Power in Afghanistan by G. Whitney Azoy. Yep. I've been having my eye on this ever since the beginning of the year when I read like the other Afghan books. Because this is about the sport, the game called Buzkashi, which is a fascinating fucking sport, I guess. I don't know much about it yet. I've heard of it before I started reading all of these, though I wasn't sure if it was real or just something made up. But this is a sport where like people riding horses throw around like a carcass of like a goat, and there's a book about that. I need to fucking learn about this, about the historical, cultural like significance of this, where this came from, how the fuck this game is played, what the fuck are the rules of a game like that. I'm super interested to read this. Really happy I was able to get this from the library. Those are my 2 physical books right now. Those are my 2 top priorities.
Oh, wait, holy shit, I completely forgot to mention that, you know how I have always like set my reading goal for a year at 10 books and then barely did that over the last couple years? It is now February and I've already read 10 books. It's done. Fluids was my 10th book this year and we are only in February. I don't know what happened. Granted, a bunch of the books were very short, but this still surprised me. I've never had this much of a jump start this early in the year. So my reading goal is technically done. And I decided to just double it. I just put it at 20 and see what happens. This would be dope if I keep going. I've been in such a good flow reading books regularly recently, especially since I got used to actually reading on my phone or whatever while I'm on my daily commute or just anywhere where I'm waiting for something. Reading ebooks and having my phone with me anyway, that's synchronized with my my actual ebook reader or whatever. Every time I just sit in a bus or a train or whatever, I just take out my phone and read a few pages now. It already became a habit. Or even when I'm like in business school doing my shit, but I have like some free time, like half an hour or whatever, I just sit down and read a bit. I never used to do that, and that really does a difference. It's not gonna keep up for the entirety of the year. I'm gonna have my droughts for sure, but right now I'm cruising through these pages. It's really, really cool. We'll see how that goes. But that's me for February. Thanks for watching. Keep reading. Bye-bye.